Shaquille Brewster back with us. Also joining the conversation, Charles Coleman, civil rights attorney and former prosecutor. And you know, on a day like this, she would be here. Brittany Packnett Cunningham, former member of President Obama's policing task force. Brittany, we heard from former President Obama. He wrote in a statement this: "We know that true justice is about much more than a single verdict in a single trial." President Biden said this should be the beginning, not the end. But here's the thing. We have seen leaders say this many, many times. Do you have any reason to believe that this time is different?
Unfortunately, I don't, Stephanie. And I should start by saying that the only modicum of relief that I feel goes directly to George Floyd's family, that the bit of accountability that this system allows them is the very least that they should have had. Guilty was the very obvious choice here. And I am prayerful that they get even a piece of closure, because at the very least they deserve that. And yet and still, you heard Chris, the family attorney, use the word accountability. And that is what we should actually be centering here. Language matters. Once George took his last breath, there was no possibility for anything else than accountability. Stephanie, you've heard me say that before. I and many others have been saying that for years. And then if we continue to conflate justice with accountability, then we will set the bar too low, and this will continue to happen. We know that while this trial occurred, Daunte Wright was killed. We know that while this verdict was being prepared, that Ma'Khia Bryant was killed by police in Columbus, Ohio. The police have not actually slowed down their killings of people, and Black people in particular. And so this entire system is what needs to be put on trial. This entire system is what has to be interrupted, because that's the only way to achieve true justice, which is Black people and all people living and thriving. Nothing can replace the Floyds being able to hug George today. That would be true justice.
Then, Shaq, you were on the ground. You were speaking to people before and after that verdict was read. Where do all those demonstrators, those protesters go? This is a moment of joy, but they're not done fighting.
That's exactly right. And, you know, something that we noticed yesterday is just how quickly that large crowd that you saw in Gabe's piece there, how quickly that crowd formed. We got word that the verdict was coming. We got about an hour and a half heads up, and we were talking about it, broadcasting that. And you saw people come really from seemingly nowhere, come to the downtown area straight in front of the courthouse and pull out their phones and watch. And as they were watching on their phones, you heard a hush come over the crowd as the court went into session, and then someone on a bullhorn yelled out, "Guilty." And that's really when you saw the mood shift from that tension, that anxiety, people saying that they were shaking, that their hands were shaking, to one of celebration and relief. I had a couple of conversations with people. There was one that, at least on Twitter, really stuck out with people, and I want to share a little bit of it with you right now. Take a look at that moment.
And so, for myself personally, this has been a wake-up call for the privilege I've had, and I haven't even realized it, and the difficulty for all Black and brown people. So I'm thrilled that justice was served.
What are you going to do with that realization? Where do you take that?
I want to find out. I don't know. I actually Googled it today.
What did you Google?
What can a white person do to help out Black Lives Matter?
And that's one thing you really notice. I mean, this was a jury that was comprised of 6 white individuals, 6 people who were of color, 4 Black, and 2 identified as mixed race. And you saw that level of diversity even in the crowd, even in the people who decided to come down to the courthouse, who decided to march the streets of downtown Minneapolis. You got a sense that if George Floyd's killing was not an eye-opening moment for people, then this verdict was another opportunity for people who probably tried to ignore, tried to stay away from the realities of what's going on. It was another moment for them to someone have a reckoning in their own mind.
A simple and really important Google search. What can white people do to actually help this? Charles, walk us through what happens next for Derek Chauvin.
Well, what we will see happen next is that over the course of the next few weeks, there will be arguments presented to the judge about aggravating factors that should give the highest sentence possible. Normally, because Derek Chauvin does not have a criminal record, he would be subjected to a relatively low number in sentencing. But prosecutors in this case are going to argue for the highest amount of time to be given to Derek Chauvin in this case. They're going to use factors like the fact that there were a number of young people. We had a 9-year-old girl who witnessed this killing in front of her very eyes. The fact that Derek Chauvin was in fact a police officer, and police officers are sworn to serve and protect communities, and a number of other factors that prosecutors are going to be pushing for in order to try and get the maximum sentence possible. 8 weeks from now, prosecutors will present their final sentencing memo. They will hear from members of the community. You will hear from the Floyd family and others affected by this killing, and the judge will make a ruling as to what Derek Chauvin's ultimate fate is in terms of his sentencing. Did
Derek Chauvin hurt his case in the fact that he had an opportunity to speak, to show contrition, mercy, something, and he didn't? He chose not to testify.
At the end of the day, Stephanie, I don't necessarily know that from a legal standpoint, it would have been wise for Derek Chauvin to get on the stand and try to tell his story. The reality is that most of America, and I believe, quite frankly, that jury had very little interest in hearing what Chauvin had to say. I know that that runs contrary to what our legal system says is supposed to happen. But when you see that, when you watch that, when you witness that video, there's very little that he could have offered that would have been persuasive in any regard to any jury across America.
Charles, a few weeks after Chauvin's sentencing, the other officers are going to face their trial in August. Does the verdict we got, the guilty verdict, does it make it easier or harder for them to be convicted?
One can only hope that the sense of accountability that has been established as part of this verdict will carry over to those officers in that case. The reality is that there is also the consideration that jurors may feel like because Chauvin was the main actor and he has now been held accountable, that these others may have a lower burden. They may find sympathy with the fact that some of the officers were new on the force and considered to be rookies. I would find that to be unfortunate and an aberration. But nonetheless, these are things that we will have to watch for in the coming weeks.
Brittany, the nation's largest police union released a statement on the verdict, writing this, quote, "Our system of justice has worked as it should." What do you think about that?
You know, I'd actually like to quote a former student of mine named Sophia Hunt. She's brilliant. And she said that this verdict is not evidence that the system works, but it's evidence that policing doesn't. This is a moment where we have to remain focused on the entire system. And I'm very sure that the police union would like to participate in a rehabilitation of it and its industry's image in this moment. I'm very sure that they would like to set out Derek Chauvin and the other 3 officers as the exception to the rule and an aberration, when in fact, Derek Chauvin and the other 3 officers are a product of their environment. The institution of policing is precisely the problem here. And at the end of the day, whether it's Derek Chauvin in Minnesota, or it's Darren Wilson in Ferguson, or it's the officer who killed Ma'Khia Bryant in Columbus, Ohio, we need to ensure that instead of pursuing more policing, we pursue actual public safety that reinvests in people and stops investing in institutions that continue to kill us.
To that very point, Charles, is the police union rewriting the narrative? Because the original release from the Minneapolis Police Department about the incident with George Floyd, it resurfaced. And I need to read how they first described what happened. Quote, "Officers were able to get the suspect into handcuffs and noted he appeared to be suffering medical distress. Officers called for an ambulance. He was transported to Hennepin County Medical Center by ambulance, where he died a short time later." If bystanders had not started recording, teenagers, would we even be having any of this conversation? Because this is how the police qualified this, a medical incident.
I agree entirely with everything that Brittany has just said, and it's partially because what we already know about policing and the narrative that they have attempted to force on the American public is that they have the hardest jobs, that no one can ever understand them, and that they cannot do it better. Through all of the work that many people like myself, Brittany, and countless others do in community, we always encounter cops telling us that we don't understand how hard their jobs are. Yet and still, what we have witnessed over and over again is countless incidents where police and law enforcement are able to handle other situations with other groups of people in different fashions using lower amounts of force as they do with us. And so, yes, police do rewrite narratives. This is a classic example of that. And it's something that we can have to continue to push back on if we are ever going to achieve the type of accountability that is going to move the needle forward substantially.
Hey, thanks for watching our YouTube channel. You should know that you can follow today's top stories and breaking news and catch up on your favorite MSNBC shows all in one place. Download the NBC News app today.